Hi, I'm Rob Price, editor of PA Live, and this is our commentary of the week. It's a service that we provide for our subscribers and, of course, our readers. What are pro-union states like Pennsylvania, where I was born, and New York, where I live, to make of the recent recall elections in Wisconsin? These were elections spearheaded by unions in the state, stung by the success of Governor Scott Walker in weakening the ability of unions to organize. Walker's reforms included eliminating the automatic deduction from workers' paychecks to pay for union dues. So if those workers want to support their local unions, that's fine. They're just going to have to get out their checkbooks to do it. In response to these reforms, the political arms of Wisconsin's unions organized recall elections that, if successful, would have flipped the state's Senate from Republican control to Democratic. Two of the recalls worked, in part because the Republican incumbents were particularly weak. One had been caught fooling around with a young Republican volunteer on his staff, for instance. Overall, though, the effort fell short by one election. Wisconsin's Senate remains under GOP control by one seat, at least for the time being. Now, the Wall Street Journal, which produces probably the most articulate conservative editorial page in the country, opined in the aftermath of that election that the results were a setback for unions. But hold your horses. If you think the Journal's editorials are as irrefutable as they are eloquent. The New York Times, a bastion, I think, of genteel liberal thought, argued just the opposite, that the Wisconsin results were a repudiation of, quote, union busters. Now, I've been reporting for years on the extraordinary sense of entitlement that I found members of New York's public unions seem to possess. But I also differentiate between public employees unions and unions that operate in the private sector. The activities of private sector unions, such as those striking Verizon, for instance, this week, are a private matter, I think, usually between those unions and corporate management and corporate shareholders. I feel differently about public sector unions. I have never seen a situation in which the interests of taxpayers, represented in labor negotiations by public administrators, such as school superintendents, are adequately protected or represented. The conditions of natural economic conflict between, let's say, the administrator of a school district and its union members simply don't exist in the public sector as they do in the private. Specifically, administrators negotiating with public sector unions do not have the same motivation to protect their shareholders, taxpayers, as the management of private corporations do. A basic sense of conflict is necessary in all negotiations, and most school superintendents don't have the belly for it. They've been teachers themselves. They are fundamentally sympathetic with the party with whom they should be an adversary in negotiations. And I have no moral complaints with that. I would feel the same way if I'd worked 15 years on a DOT road crew or a PennDOT road crew and then moved into the administration. My point is only that public entity administrators are basically unfit for the hard, tough job of negotiating with adversaries. Now, don't think for a moment that public employee unions think so gently. If Wisconsin's public unions took one on the nose this past week, I'm not going to be one to cry about it. I've watched enough public unions in New York recently permit the layoffs of their younger members in order to protect the interests of their senior members to have very little sympathy with these organizations. All the same, I tend to operate in the middle range of these ideological battles. I may be impatient with the selfishness of some unions, but I personally admire the history of union organization in the United States. After all, I grew up in Pittsburgh, where there have been historic strikes in the steel sectors, in the manufacturing sectors, etc. I think we can credit labor unions in part for the creation of a vast middle class in this country, and that's a class that has been taking it on the chin with the gradual demise of labor unions over the last 40 years. So I don't wake up in the morning thinking of ways to kick labor unions in the shins. It's no surprise to me that two respectable editorial pages could come to two entirely different conclusions about the Wisconsin recall elections. We are experiencing a critical transitional period in our national economy. The influence of unions has been weakening steadily over the past 30 years, and the public sector unions probably think they're fighting for their lives. It's no wonder respectable voices are differing on their most basic interpretations of facts and events. Much is at stake, and the ideological middle ground is up for grabs in Pennsylvania, in New York, in the country. But here's a concluding thought. If unions want to continue exercising their influence in American politics and in the American economy, their leaders are going to have to acknowledge that the ground is shifting underneath them. The Times can believe that public unions gave a fair accounting of themselves in Wisconsin, but the fact is their position is weaker than it was 2 years ago. This is not a time for unions to be crowing and boasting about winning anything. And that's the lesson that I'm taking from the elections in Wisconsin. Thank you.